Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Well, lately the news has been surrounding pretty much brokers, not carriers, no one else, brokers. And there's a good reason for that. Even though brokers are not the most important player in the logistics chain when it comes to the trucking industry, they are, after all, middlemen. The reality is a significant amount of carriers depend on freight brokers to get their freight. So yeah, when we're talking about brokers, we're really talking about carriers as well. So as we already talked about, as brokers see the floor fall from underneath their feet, they're dragging those carriers with them. Now, over the past few weeks, I have had a significant amount of emails as well as some comments on this channel asking how the heck is it possible that brokers who price gouge, who take an astronomical amount off of each load, are going bankrupt. So today we're talking about this topic. Ready? Let's go. So over the past few years, especially those of us who rely on the spot market for our freight, can all agree that we have seen freight rates deteriorate sharply. Another point that many of us can agree on is the fact that due to the lack of broker transparency, most carriers are pretty much in the dark when it comes to understanding how much the load that they're hauling actually pays. We hear from shippers when we come to get loaded that they paid the broker 1.5 to 2 times more than what we are getting paid by that same broker. We also see that contract carriers are on average earning 81 cents more per mile than spot carriers. And we also know that there are way too many trucks relative to the amount of freight in the market. So brokers are comfortably getting a rate from a shipper and then giving that rate a 20 to 50% haircut before selling it to the carrier. So the question of how the heck are brokers going bankrupt and going out of business when they're taking an astronomical amount off of each load is a really valid question. Logically, one would think that this is a time when brokerages are flourishing, or as my business partner likes to call it, it's the broker's time. But that, of course, all falls apart in reality because nothing in the world is this simple. We're going to go over several points in this video, and then we're going to put all those points into a summary that is easy to understand. So according to OTR Solutions, which many of you are familiar with, it's a huge factoring company. They just released an article either yesterday, sometime in the last few days. According to them, and I'm going to attach it down below, I quote, "As of 2019, the number of new freight brokers continued to expand with over 4,000 active brokers founded in 2019. As of 2022, freight brokerages explode in the post-COVID logistics world. And by the end of 2022, nearly 8,000 freight brokers were operating that had been established that year. As of October 2023, the freight brokerage market shows its first signs of contraction since the COVID boom. By October, 3,000 of the nearly 8,000 brokers founded and operating at the end of 2022 have left the market only 10 months later." So the first thing to, of course, note is that the amount of brokers in the market has dramatically increased. Even in 2023, even though the rate at which brokerages are increasing in the market has slowed down, there's still an increase. This means there's also an increase in competition for brokers. And what do we already all know by heart? In a free market, competition usually drives rates down, supply and demand. The next thing I want to talk about is how brokers actually fund their growth. Considering the boom that lasted from mid-2020 until early 2022, many brokers decided to expand, hoping that this kind of market is going to exist forever. Again, according to OTR Solutions, there are two main strategies that brokers use in order to fund growth. Number one is the supply chain finance, and number two, asset-based lending. I quote, "Supply chain finance allows brokers to pay carriers in a timely fashion, even if their customers, the shippers, pay more slowly." In other words, those quick pay options that you see that brokers offer, this is what supply chain finance is all about. Then there's the asset-based lending, which is way more common. I quote, "The carrier payables are advanced to the freight broker instead of the carrier directly. The broker is borrowing against the carrier's money today, with that invoice coming due at a later date, typically 30 days after delivery and invoicing. So usually in good markets, this is not something that we really feel because brokers do tend to pay in a timely manner, more or less. But in this market, and I quote, the carrier funds being advanced to freight brokers have a very high likelihood of being improperly allocated towards covering operating costs, which exceed the gross margin they're making on freight. So just to make it super clear, basically what brokers are doing is they're taking the money that is supposed to go to the carrier and allocating it, hoping that, hey, I still have 30 days to pay the invoice to the carrier. They're allocating that money to cover their operational costs, but they're not actually making enough money to stay liquid enough to actually pay those carriers when the invoice comes due. The best analogy for this I can think of is let's imagine there is a really carrier, and this carrier has a driver that they pay every Friday. But instead of putting that money aside to make an on-time full payment to the person who's actually driving the truck, what they end up doing is taking that money and investing it into paying down their equipment to reduce that balance owed. Friday comes around, the market is really crap, so the carrier didn't make as much money as they hoped, and the carrier just used their driver's salary to basically pay off an expense that they had. So who is out in the cold? Well, the driver, of course, even though he or she worked their butt off all week long. It's trash. All right, so now let's put it all together. Why the heck are brokers going to when they're taking so much off the top of each load? So let's go to the board for a second so I can illustrate it. So reason number one, well, we're going to look at this chart that I made that takes not real numbers, but it pretty much simulates the situation that has happened over the past 4 years. So let's say in 2019, there were 1,000 brokers right here, right? And the number of loads was 10,000 loads. That means each broker got on average 10 loads. In 2020, there were 2,000 brokers because in middle of 2020, that's when the market started picking up. 2,000 brokers, and all of a sudden the volume is up, 25,000 loads. Now each broker gets 12.5 loads on average. 2021, another increase in brokers, the market is booming, plus the volume increased to 50,000 loads. Now each broker gets 16.7 loads on average. Then 2022 rolls around, there's still an increase in brokers hoping to catch that heat wave, we'll call it, in the trucking industry, 5,000 brokers, but the volume went down to 35,000 loads. Now, each broker gets on average 7 loads. And then we have 2023 right here, 6,000 brokers because brokers are still coming into the market, but the volume just went to crap, 8,000 loads. Now each broker on average gets 1.5 loads or so. So basically, as you can see, the competition increases, but at the same time, freight volume decreases, which means that the amount of loads each broker gets also decreases. So what is their solution? Well, to take more off the top. So let's take a look if that taking more off the top actually results in more money. And we're going to say so. It's between 25 to 50% off the top. We'll average it at 35% for this year. So let's take a look. Here are our average loads. So here are our average loads, right, for each year. Let's say the load rate never changes. $2,000 is what these brokers get paid per load from the shipper. In 2019, those 10 loads at $2,000, they were taking, let's say, 18%. Well, that comes out to $3,600. In 2020, 12.5 loads on average, $2,000. The commission didn't change off the top. Now they're getting $4,500. 2021, they're getting more volume because the volume in the freight market increased, 16.7 loads, $2,000. And now they're charging 20% off the top. Here we go. What a wonderful number, $6,666. 2022 rolls around. All of a sudden, the competition is high, but the volume started going down slowly. Only 7 loads on average, $2,000, but they take a higher commission at 25%. They're still making pretty much half of what they made before. And then we have 2023. Where the competition is huge, 1.5 or so loads per broker because the volume went down, still $2,000 from the shipper, right? And they're charging now 35% off the top of each load. Look at their income. This is how it's possible, because it's not only about what they're taking off the top, it's what kind of volume they're actually selling. Reason number 2, since we already know that most brokers use asset-based lending and are literally spending the money that should be put aside for the carrier when the invoice comes due, but they're taking that money and using it for their own expenses or to fuel growth, that means that more and more brokers are not paying on time, if at all. This also means that those brokers who are delaying their payments like crazy, or in the worst case, not paying their carriers at all, these are brokers that are losing carriers. At least I hope so. I personally don't give second chances. If a broker has delayed my payment for an extremely prolonged period of time for no reason, or if they tried not to pay me at all, bye-bye. Now we know that brokers cannot exist without carriers. So as more brokers are losing their carrier network due to non-payment or delayed payment, they can no longer provide the capacity needed to get more volume from their clients. And this is a snowball effect. All of a sudden, for that broker, money is extremely scarce. The carriers that do end up hauling a load for that broker do not get paid because money is scarce, and those carriers fall off, and again, snowball effect into oblivion. So yeah, guys, I hope that this video managed to explain to you how it is possible that two things can be true, where brokers do price gouge and take a ton off the top of each load while also going bankrupt. It's all pretty simple, and it pretty much boils down to finance mismanagement. So again, be careful who you work with, because currently it's kind of save your own skin like never before. Wishing you all an amazing rest of your week, and I'll see you in the next video.